Hello and welcome back. And help me welcome back Dr. Michele with us. She's going to be talking about today codependency, and she's going to define it for us so that we can know if we ourselves have some of those character traits or if we can know if somebody else have them and how to identify them. So Dr. Michele, can you tell us a little bit about codependency?
Absolutely. It's really important for us to be able to identify, because I think that most of us can do some form of codependent behavior patterns, maybe in one area of our life and not necessarily all areas of our life. So we have to understand that codependency is a developed and learned coping skill pattern, and it can control our life and affect the way that we have all of our relationships with other people as well as ourselves, and also with God. Now, you can be codependent with, let's say your spouse, but not be codependent at work. Or be codependent with the church leader, but not codependent with somebody else. So it can be in pocket areas, or it can be straight across the board in all areas. So to begin with, that term developed in the 1970s when you looked at it in the healthcare profession as a word that was going along with co-addict, because they saw that it was the person in a family system that had some family member that was an addict, and this person enabled their behaviors and didn't allow the natural consequences. So enabling was basically partnering and helping another person to continue doing bad behaviors. So that is how it originally started, and over the years, the definition has changed, the application has changed. It's not just in addiction systems. And so we've learned more about codependency, but recognizing that it's an unhealthy way of adapting with compulsive behavior patterns that a lot of people don't even realize they're doing. And I can say that because I've been codependent in my past. And I wasn't codependent across the board, but I was codependent in one area of my life at one point. And God really had to shake me up. And I'd say the first thing that really shook me up was that God told me that codependency is a sin pattern. And that really rocked me because I had to really understand that and think about it. So just definitions in books that are very mainstream out there. One book is by Melody Beattie on codependency no more, and she defines it as a codependent person is one who let another person's behavior affect him or her, who is obsessed with controlling a person's behavior. And I used that definition for a very long time, until one day, God speaks to me a lot right when I'm waking up in the morning. I get handouts that pop in my head and I have to run to my office and write them and stuff like that. So one morning he woke me up. He said, want to know my definition of codependency? It's like, well, that's a given. Yes, I want to know your definition. And I felt like God said to me that codependency is misappropriated grace, mercy, and forgiveness that is performed in a way that is not pleasing to God and removes natural consequences.
That's powerful.
It is, and it blew my mind when I really started thinking about it. So I thought about okay, so when people, Christians especially, we've been socialized with a lot of different things. So when we look at codependency, we may think we're supposed to be doing what we're doing with grace and mercy. So here's an example to give us a picture of that. So let's say you're in a Walmart parking lot and you see a father that's beating his 3-year-old and the kid is bleeding and screaming. Are you going to say, oh, that man is having a really bad day. I wonder what's happened. I feel so bad for him. He's obviously really upset. Or am I going to go, no way, I'm calling the police. You're hurting this kid. Okay, that's misappropriated grace, mercy, and forgiveness. I'm not saying you should judge the man and banish him to hell by what he's doing, but by no means shouldn't you discern what he's doing is completely inappropriate and allow him the natural consequence that's going to come from that. So when we put in an example like that, we really can see that misappropriating grace, mercy, and forgiveness and saving and rescuing and fixing and pleasing people from natural consequence is not a godly behavior pattern, if that makes sense.
Wow. can you go a little bit further and tell us some of the different character traits that come along with that?
Well, first of all, we have to understand it can be a very extensive set of coping skills that rise up because we're trying to self-protect. It's a form of self-preservation. So let's say, for example, if you grew up in a family and your father was an alcoholic, let's say, and you learned, let's keep dad happy, don't make noise, don't walk in front of his TV set, don't bring any friends over when he's trying to watch football or whatever. You learn to tap dance around, walk on eggshells, and please, so that you didn't have to deal with the consequence of his anger towards you. And so you learned it as a coping skill to survive an environment. And so it became a pattern of learning how to deal with a dysfunctional environment. And so you develop this pattern and got to the point where it starts being used in different areas of your life. So we take on a role as a caretaker. And, you know, as women, that's a natural role for a lot of us. We take care of our children. We take care of our families. It's not bad to be a caretaker, but when we're doing it in a way that's out of order, it is. And so we have to realize that people have responsibilities. So, for example, if your 14 or 15-year-old cut school, don't write them a note so that they get out of trouble at school. Let them face the detention.
Right.
Because then you are taking responsibility for their actions and you're teaching them none. And this is how we have so many sociopaths in our society, because they're not learning consequence for actions. And when you do codependent behaviors, you remove consequences. And so you enable a person to have poor or destructive behavior patterns, and you continually save and rescue, and you view it as you being loving. You view it as you're helping. You view it as you're being kind. But in essence, you really are stepping up and taking the role of God. That person needs to go to God for help. That person needs to face a consequence and be transformed. You know, God is way more concerned with our character than he is our comfort. He allows us to go through things, and he does that so we're transformed. But with codependency, we save people and we try to keep them as comfortable as possible. And so we develop patterns, and we really aren't realizing how much we're meeting our own need. We don't want to deal with our husband losing his job because he's drinking, for example. We don't want to deal with our child being arrested and in jail because of what they did. We want to bail them out. We want to get them out of trouble. And so what we do is we start taking on the role of God. And it's a very stressful role, because we're carrying burdens that are not meant for us to carry. We're trying to carry a mantle that is not ours to carry. And so we start carrying people's problems. It starts consuming our life. I got to help this person. I got to help this person. I've known people that have spent their entire retirement account on saving their children, have done everything, working the equivalent of 2 jobs, because they might be doing all the work of a co-worker that isn't doing their job, or different things that just put tremendous pressure and burdens on us. And it's a mantle that God never intended us to carry. And we're robbing him of being able to change these people because they never get a natural consequence. If I get a natural consequence, I learn, stop doing this. I'm going to realize that it's not mine to carry. So when we're codependent, we can have a very compulsive desire to fix, save, rescue, and carry things and put it all on our own back. And in essence, we're taking God off the throne and we're putting ourselves on it. And this is very much of a non-biblical lifestyle, because the Bible tells us to love the way God loves. Does God allow us to face problems? Absolutely. Does God allow us consequence? Absolutely. Is God a God of boundaries? Absolutely. And so if we remove boundaries and consequences, and we do love where it actually saves and rescues, we are no longer doing biblical principles. We are twisting them.
So if someone takes the place of God, almost becoming like, I guess, the people helpers, you are enabling someone who's being codependent. So that there's a cycle, because it goes back and forth. So how are people helpers more so susceptible to maybe follow themselves in that cycle, in that trap?
Well, I think that you can develop codependency in family systems, but I think overall, Christians to some degree are socialized to help and serve and give, and women in general in society are taught and promoted to be caregivers. So we get really blurry on what that looks like. So as a Christian, a minister, a counselor, or any other kind of person that's serving and helping people, we can fall into the trap of overdoing it, of knowing when to say yes and when to say no. I probably don't have as strict a boundaries as a lot of counselors I know. If I have somebody in a really challenging place in life, if they need to call me at midnight or 1 a.m, if I'm awake, I will always answer the phone no matter what time it is. And so, that's my decision for where the boundary is. But if somebody starts putting additional pressure for me to carry them through it and they're not doing the work themselves, well, then I got to say no. So we got to know where the lines are. And so it's really important to recognize that without understanding biblical principle, without really weighing and measuring our people helping and our love to biblical principle, we can twist Bible principles. So if somebody, like, for example, I'll give you an example from my own family. My children were very independent when they got out and went to college. I had a daughter one time. I mean, they really asked me for next to nothing. They went to private school. They got scholarships, and they were pretty much on their own. And I help them occasionally, but they pretty much earned their way in college. And they each had jobs. One of them had said to me one time, "Mom," this is when you went over on your minutes. I went over my minutes. I really blew it. I said, okay. And that time I bailed her out because she had a lot of hard classes. I paid that bill. But I said, you keep track of your minutes. Because if you don't keep track of your minutes, I'm not paying it the next time. Well, lo and behold, she did it again about 3 months later. I said, sorry, it's not my responsibility. If you told me I don't have enough money for food, I'd be helping you. If you told me I needed to buy these books, I'd be helping you. But this was your responsibility. And I'm not bailing you out. So you get the choice of either dropping calculus if it's too hard to do while doing, working, or you just have to take an extra shift to pay for it. And it's hard to say that to your kids. You don't want to do that, but I want her to be responsible, and she's very responsible. And so when do I save and rescue and when don't I? If you got sick and you couldn't work, well, by all means, I'm going to give you the money to make up that, because it wasn't that you were doing bad behavior. But I'm not going to reward bad behavior. I'll help you, but then if you don't learn, I'm not going to help you again. I'm going to have a boundary and give a consequence, if that explains it.
No,
now, as women,
it's a very good explanation of boundaries for I guess behaviors that need to be corrected.
go ahead.
I'm sorry, because I was going to go a little bit further. Do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, as far as how we're socialized as women, I find that a lot of women think they should have no boundaries and consequences with their spouses. And that is not true. If your spouse brings a girlfriend into your bedroom, well, that's a given. We're supposed to have a boundary and give a consequence. But what if your spouse is being abusive? What if your spouse is using drugs or alcohol? What if your spouse is having your kid look at pornography? What are you to do? Are you supposed to just be submissive and let it go and do nothing? No, that's not biblical. But I think a lot of people don't know where the lines are of when do I submit to something and when do I absolutely give a boundary and a consequence. That is essentially important and very messed up in the church. I see it every day in counseling.
And that's where I was going to go. How far do you think it's infiltrated or a problem in the church?
It's a big problem. A lot of it is not necessarily because the leader is trying to, but because things aren't qualified. So if I tell you to help out your brother, that's true, but let's qualify it. If your brother is gambling his rent money, are you supposed to help him out and pay for it? No, you have a consequence. You spent your rent money on gambling. I'm not going to bail you out. And if I did bail you out, it would be one time with the requirement that you're going to some kind of 12-step group in counseling to get at the root of your problem. Then I'll help you, but you have to do something. So if I don't have those kinds of boundaries in place, then it's not going to be good. And so we hear a teaching, and what we have to understand is that you have a whole bunch of people listening to that teaching. Pastor might have meant it wonderfully, but There's people out there that are they're listening to it and taking it through the filter of a core belief system that says, it's my responsibility to save and rescue. If I can help, if I can give, I have to do it. And they're taking it through a thinking pattern of codependency. And so in essence, they're not being able to decide when they should and when they shouldn't.
Wow. Now I'm trying to think, 'cause I think you might have touched on this at the beginning, but again, how are these behaviors developed?
Well, they can be developed in a whole lot of different environments, but I usually have people look at family first. So you have your developmental skills, and when I talk about Romans 12:2, don't be conformed to the world, you're conformed to the world by your family system, by your community and culture, and by your peer groups. So we could look at any three of those, but I usually start with people looking at their family system. What were they taught? So obviously, if it was any form of emotional problems, addiction problems, alcohol, drugs, pornography, anger, rage, abuse systems, they are all going to be trained to be codependent because they have to survive the system. So mom is going to say, shh, don't do that. Daddy doesn't want you to do that. Or those kind of things that you're constantly trying to please. The other thing that I've seen a lot of in really good Christian families is mothers that just think they're supposed to do everything and they burn themselves to a crisp. So they have to volunteer for every ministry. They have to go to every church service. They have to help every person. They have to have every person come in their house to live. And bottom line is you can't handle your own responsibilities if you're carrying everybody else's responsibilities. So you end up teaching your children and your family system very codependent patterns that then go down, as the Bible says, the sins of the father go to the third and fourth generation. And so remember, I can prove, and I do in my writing about codependency, there's a lot of scriptures that will show you that codependency is a sin pattern. And so we want to recognize if we learned it in our family system, we could have learned it in our church. I've been in churches that told me that you have to be there every time. You have to volunteer every time there's a need. No, that's not true. My first priority is God. My second priority is my family. I don't take care of my church before my family. I have a messed up, out of order system if I do that. So we can be socialized in our community, our church systems, our work environment. They can do the same thing. And it can be anywhere. But the bottom line is it comes through the filter of an experience that you process a message. And that message forms thinking patterns and core beliefs that then you operate in your speech patterns, your choices, and all your life and relationship skills, which is basically how everything develops. In all of your thinking produces your emotions, your speech patterns, your life, and your relationship skills. So anytime you want to figure out why is my life skills messed up, why are my emotions messed up, it's because I had experiences that promoted messages, and now I have to look at them and see if they match the Bible. Because if they don't, I need to change them.
Wow. Now, when I said before that I downloaded your ebook, and in the second chapter, you had a diagram, or several diagrams outlining thinking patterns. So I actually want to get into those a little bit, but if you want to find out what those thinking patterns are, you're going to have to click the next video, because she's going to dive into that. Because when she was talking about volunteering at the church, every time the doors are open, she was able to say no. A lot of people are not able to say no, but you have to know when it's time to change your thinking pattern, so you can take back control of your life and stop being codependent, but also learn how to say no and win. So if you want more information on those diagrams of thinking patterns, come to our next video. And again, before we go, Dr. Michele, do you want to recap anything that you shared earlier?
Again, I want people to realize that your behaviors don't define you. You are who God says you are. So if you start seeing yourself in any of the things we're talking about, don't beat yourself up. Just know that God is leading you to recognize with the very intention of transforming you into his image, so that you can go through a sanctification process, learn to identify and discern these things, and learn the skills to change them so you can look like Jesus and walk like Jesus.
Awesome. Amen to that. And until next time, we see you soon. Thank you for watching. Bye.